Hello learners, I'm Dr. Gaurav Rao. I'm Associate Professor in Department of Education, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule Ruhelkhand University, Bareilly. Today we are going to study about the paradigm shift in science teaching and learning. Before going into it, let us see what is paradigm shift. Paradigm shift is basically a term that was propounded by an American physicist and philosopher, Thomas Kuhn, which actually meant the fundamental changes that takes place in the basic concepts in the experimental practices and scientific disciplines. Fundamental change means all those changes that can be brought into the objectives of teaching science, the methods being used in science, or the pedagogy part that is being used in science, and the assessment at last. Any change or all the changes that have taken place in the science education since its inception is basically talks about the paradigm shift. Let us see what change has taken place. The old paradigm that was more prevalent and most of the time now also the teachers are being using is the teaching paradigm, which means an institution or a teacher is basically to provide teaching. Teaching means transfer of information from the teacher to the students. And the new paradigm talks about the learning paradigm, and which says the institution or the teacher is basically to produce learning. If learning is not done, the teaching is never considered to be done. To explain you more easily, I have basically covered the lecture in the division of teaching paradigm and learning paradigm, and I have compared the paradigm shift in various heads. Let us see. The first important thing that has changed in the objective from the teaching paradigm to the learning paradigm is the teaching paradigm talks about giving the instruction. The teacher gives the instruction in teaching paradigm, and in doing so, he transfers the information from him to the student. He tells the students what to learn and make every student reach to that answer which he has decided. It is exactly like a teacher comes into the class and asks the students, open the book, and all of us start reading, and in between one place or the other, teacher asks, have you understood? And all of us nodded together because we knew that if we asked, the teacher might get angry. Where in the learning paradigm, the instruction gets changed over the evolving of learning. The learning paradigm evolves the learning. The student itself develops his own way of learning. And in doing so, he basically constructs knowledge. He creates his own environment of learning. And in doing so, they have all together in the class learning in their own way. The teacher is never a person who is sitting all the time in front of the child and asking, study this, study that. Let us see what are the indicators of paradigm shift. In teaching paradigm, the most important indicator that we see is the curriculum expansion. Every time when we are asked that the syllabus has to be improvised, what we see there is something more that is added. The syllabus becomes more bulkier and have more load. We see the number of resources as an indicator of learning. We talk about how much students are coming for a particular course, how much students are taking in admission in a particular science institution. We talk about the quality of the faculty and their teaching. But in learning paradigm, the emphasis is not only on curriculum expansion, but it talks about the expansion in the learning styles. How the students are learning and how they are expanding their way of learning. It talks about the quality of resources rather than the number of resources. Even if there are less resources, but the product is more, the learning is of high quality, it is considered to be the better science education rather than a science education which only talks about the numbers of resources but not the quality of resources. In the learning paradigm, we talk about the increased efficiency of the student. He does not only have the competence, he also can use that competency into converting these ideas into products. We talk about the quality of students and their learning in learning paradigm. Quality of student is the most important thing. It is not the teacher who is to be considered as how he is if the learning is not done and if the product is not well. Okay, let us see some of the learning strategies that have shifted from the teaching paradigm to the learning paradigm, and how have the science paradigm has shifted. Many of you must be remembering the fixed time that was given to you, that is of 35 to 45 minutes in a classroom, and still that is existing in our schools. We have fixed time, fixed learning space, and we are fixed of learning. We learn with the process the teacher tells us. We proceed in the same speed as we are asked by our teacher. And in doing so, the learning becomes in parts. Parts in sense, if in one period, suppose you could not complete one chapter, in the next period you are reading that chapter in parts. And it is also decided that who is going to teach and where he is going to teach. The problem becomes more when it is separated into subjects like physics, biology, or chemistry. Whereas in learning paradigm, there is no fixed time learning. You can learn on your own speed. You can learn anywhere you want. And in doing so, what a child does, he learns various strategies, various points, and at various steps. And in understanding a concept, he understands the various sub-concepts that are related to it. And in doing so, he learns holistically. And when I say he can go anywhere around him, he can talk to the person, those who have worked over that particular concept of science. He can work in laboratory. He can read those findings in reference room or library. He develops his learning holistically, and there is no fixed pace as such. So he actually develops the interrelationship of science with various other subjects, that develops the interdisciplinary nature and interdisciplinary learning strategies. Let us see the learning task changes that have taken place in the paradigm shift in the science teaching. The teacher in the teaching paradigm emphasizes upon the completion of the syllabus. If you remember, most of the schools still follows a pattern wherein 4 chapters separated into 3 sections of the examination times. First 4 months would be for chapter 1 to 4, next 4 months would be for chapter 8 to 12 say, and rest of them in the last. This completion of syllabus is the most important aspect which a teacher talks of and thinks of. And because of this, what happens is this, they keep on teaching rather than seeing that the child is learning or not. And because they are not concerned about the small problems the child is facing while teaching, they get to know when they assess the child at the last. That is the summative assessment. That is the final examination or the term end examination, under which the child comes to get less scores or more scores. Okay, one more important thing that you have to understand is the assessments are basically internals. Means, if I have taught science in my classroom, I am going to make the question paper, because I am fair that if I am not making the question paper, if any other teacher makes, what will happen to my students? Why? Because I know what I have taught and I want my students to only write that. Because the teaching paradigm has never emphasized upon the learning, never emphasized upon the holistic learning, and hence there is a problem that if the evaluations are done externally, the answers will not be coming out. The problem becomes worsen, or is another thing that you have to take into account, is that if I have made the paper, I would not allow any other teacher to check it off. Why? Because I know what I have told my students, and In science, how is it possible that if I am not checking, if somebody else is checking, the answers will not be the same? This is the subjective assessment. The problem of subjective assessment is there in teaching paradigm, and because of which the success rate are different. Okay, one more thing. How the success in the teaching paradigms found? It is by the certificates, the report cards, whether the child is shifted or promoted to the new class or not. Whereas in the learning paradigm, the success is on learning, whether the learning has been successful or not. And in doing so, the child itself learn at every step. Every step assessment is there. And when he learns on his own, even if he is evaluated externally by someone, he is going to be sure, confident and objective in giving answer. And hence, objective assessment is contrary to subjective assessment to the teaching paradigm, wherein the child learns by his own way and he is objective enough to answer. In learning paradigm, success is together with certification and the skills. Not just report cards, he has some skills with which he is going to face and see the world. Few important thing that you have to understand is this, that paradigm shift not only changes the objectives, the learning tasks and strategies, it had actually followed some of the theories of learning. Let us see. The teaching paradigm basically says that knowledge is acquired by the child, by the information given by the teacher, and the student develops that information as his new knowledge. In doing so, what happens is this, that teacher transfers those things from him to the child. That means it is a unidirectional learning. The teacher transfers what he knows to the child instead of asking the student to what he knows and improves his teaching and then again teaches. In doing so, the teacher not gives any chance the child to imagine. And even at some places when imagination is done, it is done in the controlled form. He is never asked to imagine if you were on the moon. They were not imagined to taste of the mango. They were not asked to tell the biggest leaf they have seen. Hence, this teaching paradigm is a teacher-centered paradigm, where everything is pivoted around the teacher. And hence, the nurturing of the student is controlled. He is controlled by a fence around and is asked to learn, grow as per the fences around him. Whereas in the learning paradigm, it is said that knowledge is self-generated. The child, when goes into the various places, meets the various stakeholders, develops his own knowledge. He constructs his own knowledge. In doing so, he not only reads, he meets, he talks, he discusses, he fights, he falsifies the theories, he validates what he knows, and hence it leads to a multidirectional learning. Multidirectional learning is something that is very important for science education in India. And on the contrary to the teaching paradigm, the imagination and intuitive learning is prominent. The child himself is given chance to imagine and use his intuition to what will happen. Suppose you were giving a child to go into the field and collect some of the leaves and tell what differences they see. He not only imagines the things, the leaves which is seen around him or her, he also goes into the fields and converts those imagination into true reality. And science is that only, converging the imagination into the reality. In doing so, when I am a teacher, I am giving my child to learn on his own. I am thinking what and how he is learning. I'm basically shifting from teacher-centered paradigm to the learner-centered paradigm. Learner-centered paradigm means the child is most important. Everything that I as a teacher do, expect is around my child. And in doing so, I never give my child a fence, a boundary to learn. I make him free to run as much as he can and go far away and learn the things which he sees around and concludes. And he comes to me, discusses, and comes to a theory which is objective, universal, and forever. Let us see if this paradigm shift has taken place, what me as a teacher or you as a teacher have to do. The teaching paradigm talks that teacher teaches. This was the old paradigm. The teacher teaches, and when he teaches in the class, the student learns as the teacher proceeds. It might be possible that the speed with which I am speaking, some of you might not understand. This could have been better if I and me, both of you, would have sat together and would have discussed what changes have taken place. And this is another important aspect, that in teaching paradigm, the teaching and the learning takes place separately. And basically, the teacher transfers the information in teaching paradigm from him to the learner. And in doing so, teacher is independent. He thinks, I have taught the chapter, and the student thinks, I have read the chapter. But when somebody asks you, have you read this chapter? The student says, yes, I have read the chapter, but I don't understand anything. What does that mean? It means that teaching in the classroom by the teacher has been done in separately, and learning is yet not taken place. Whereas on the opposite side, if you see the learning paradigm, teacher designs. Designs what? Designs everything that you see in the class. What is to be studied? Who and how the learning is going to take place? Where you are going to take your students to learn? Because teacher is something that facilitates further learning. He never teaches. And definitely a good teacher never says that he teaches. A good teacher inspires. And in doing so, the teacher and the student sit together, discuss, and come out with conclusions and learn cooperatively. In doing so, the teacher develops the competencies in the students as well. Competencies of differentiation, competencies of classification, and one more important thing, the observation. Observation, that is very important and the first step of science. That is the critical observation. Okay, critical observation of what? Critical observation of anything that is occurring around. See what is observing. See how the observation have been done. Is there any patterns, regularities and differences have been taken place or not? When such competencies are there, wherein he can observe, he can classify, and he can infer from it, then and only then you as a teacher can say that he has developed the competency of science. Science is basically dependent upon these competencies. If he is or the learner is not able to do it, the science education is incomplete. Okay, I'll give you one strategy of doing it, is to bring various students together and ask them what are they doing. They sit together, give them a task, ask them how you're going to do this task. You can differentiate the students on their capacities with different roles. And then a small team you can make and then ask them to work in a team. This teamwork, as designed by the learning paradigm teacher, is actually developing the cooperation, the competency, and the understanding of cooperating each other. Think it why and how it is going to help. When the students are sitting together, all of them are coming with the different knowledge bases. NCF says that every child has his own learning and the knowledge base. You give them the task, they will discuss over it. They will say, I have this thing in my mind about this particular task. The other will say, oh, I have this also. The third one say, this can be done in this way. In doing so, they not only develops understanding and learning, they cooperatively develops the competencies of a universal and true science. Let us see what and how the role of the student is there in learning science. In teaching paradigm, student is passive, sitting idly in the class, fear off with the teacher, not seeing into the teacher's eyes, and hearing everything what the teacher is saying. Teacher asks, have you understood? And all of us said, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. Why? Why not a question could have come? It is just because of the fear or of the teaching paradigm wherein the teacher-centered role is there and teacher doesn't want the student to ask a question. He has to complete the syllabus as we discussed earlier. And in doing so, the student develops his individual learning base because he is not asked to ask question, because he is not given the freedom to ask question, and even he is not given the freedom to think in his own way. He will be developing his own individual learning style and learning base. This can be difficult at times to be standardized. He, in a teaching paradigm, receives information in the sense the teacher keeps on giving the information and student keeps on receiving it. He is not asking, he is not questioning, he is not churning his information and processing it into knowledge. Okay, in teaching paradigm, one thing also you have to understand in doing so, that he does work in individualized form. He has his own understanding of a particular concept and that is individualized. It is never done as is done in learning paradigm. Okay, let us see what in learning paradigm a student has a role with. Student is active. Why? Because everything that is being done is done by the student. Teacher facilitates those learning. Teacher is around every time the student to see that if something is required by the child or not. And in doing so, when a child is active, he is discussing, he is fighting, he is saying his own idea, and in doing so, he has a group learning basis. That means the knowledge which he has is not his own. He has checked with the all friends around him, and he that way develops his own constructs of new knowledge. And that is what science is. You have to develop your own knowledge. And one thing more, as I discussed, in learning science, he learns the things in team, so he also learns to work in team as well. I hope you must have had understood. Before ending, let us rewind once again that what is paradigm shift? It is basically any fundamental change that takes place in the concept or the practice or objective of science is the paradigm shift. The shift that has taken place is the shift from teaching paradigm of science to the learning paradigm. Teaching paradigm where the teaching was emphasized, learning paradigm means where the learning is emphasized. In the objectives, we have understood that the objective of the teaching paradigm was to give instruction, transfer the information, and tell what to learn. Wherein in learning paradigm, the objective is to evolve learning, construct new knowledge, create an environment of learning, and let the student reach to a conclusion. The indicators of teaching paradigm we got to know are the curriculum expansion in teaching paradigm, the numbers of resources, the enrollment, and the quality of the faculty. Wherein the learning paradigm, it is the learning style expansion, quality of resources, and increased efficiency. The indicators leads to the learning strategies, wherein we studied in teaching paradigm, it is the fixed time, learning the same content, student learns as the teacher proceeds, and there is a fixed place of learning. But in learning paradigm, there is no fixed place, student learns holistically and they learn in their own way. We also talked about the learning theories of sciences which have taken place from the teaching paradigm to the learning paradigm. Like knowledge is acquired in teaching paradigm, but it is generated in the learning paradigm. It is unidirectional in teaching paradigm, it is multidirectional in learning paradigm. There is no imagination or intuition in the teaching paradigm, whereas there is imagination and intuitive learning in learning paradigm. The teaching paradigm is teacher-centered, whereas learning paradigm is learner-centered. There is controlled nurturing in learning paradigm, there is controlled learning in the teaching paradigm and free learning in the learning paradigm. The teacher teaches in the teaching paradigm, whereas teacher designs in learning paradigm. The teacher and the students learn separately, transfers the information, but not in the case of learning paradigm. Thank you so much. I hope you must have had studied and understood the paradigm shift that have taken place in science education. Thank you.